The Able to Care podcast is sponsored by Able Training Support Limited, who build partnerships with organisations to develop confidence and competence in their team to promote positive outcomes for all. Find the link in the description. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Able to Care podcast. I am your host, Andy Baker. Hopefully you all know that by now, but welcome if you are first-time listeners or watchers. So, on today's session, we are going to be talking about inclusion. Now, inclusion, most of you will have heard, isn't just a buzzword. You obviously tend to find it with equality and diversity and then inclusion included. But the reason that I included, and that's probably going to be a word I overuse over this podcast, so I apologize in advance. The reason I decided to do an episode just on inclusion is because I listened back to one of our episodes that we did on person-centered care, and we focused on what's called the Kitwood flower. And in the Kitwood flower, there are 5 petals that refer to different elements of emotional and psychological well-being for individuals within, and it was originally created for those living with dementia. And that included attachment, occupation, identity, and then comfort, and then inclusion. And it was my co-host Nadine and I were talking about the 5 petals surrounded by the center, which is love. And it's about building care, which is rather than focusing on the medical needs or the physiological needs, we also focus on the mental and psychological and emotional well-being of individuals that we are supporting. The reason that I decided to touch on inclusion again is because when I listened back, I felt that we missed a very important aspect of inclusion. And that is linked with the inclusion that I also try and do within classrooms, for instance, as far as my training's concerned, but also on a day-to-day basis, as far as being an employer, I try and be inclusive. So there was an aspect of the description that we kind of missed out on a little bit. We focused a little bit on the inclusion as far as kind of social inclusion. But I think we need to expand out a little bit more from there. So I thought I'd kind of start off by, let's have a look just at the dictionary definition as far as inclusion's concerned. There's 2 definitions there as far as noun, the action or state of including or of being included within a group or structure, but also the practice of policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Okay. So when we were talking about inclusion related to those living with dementia, we kind of focused on the inclusion socially and obviously everybody having their different preference when it comes to inclusion. And I think we missed out on one really important aspect of that, which is it is an equality of opportunity to access the service, to access or interact within the service in an equal way. Okay, so it's that equally fair, equality of opportunity. So I wanted to expand on that a little bit as far as, I think we tend to, it is one of those buzzwords we tend to throw around a little bit with, equality and diversity. And some people, it'll just go over their head and it's not something to really focus on. And that can sometimes be a good thing because they're not aware of any of challenges or difficulties, but it can also be a bad thing because it means they're not noticing where there genuinely is some challenges and difficulties. When we're talking about inclusion then, it's about creating a care environment where everybody feels valued, respected, and able to contribute towards the environment as well. So within my organization, so as far as my workplace is concerned, we have regular meetings to allow my staff to be included, to hear their opinions, to hear their thoughts, to get their ideas on certain strategies moving forwards. That it may not be about everything, that some things would not necessarily affect them and therefore may not be of interest, but there is some things that their input is incredibly valuable. And if we just take this very simplistically, that when people have equality of opportunity to actually input into an environment, to actually input into rules, policies and procedures and how they should be, to be allowed to input into the rules and the boundaries and the routines that are set. Well, straight away, that level of autonomy and that level of inclusion means that they're more likely to accept them, cope with them, and feel in control of them. And on the podcast, a number of times I have spoken about the importance that human beings have for this need to control. And we often hear it as a negative, but maybe I have, or maybe I haven't spoken about this in previous episodes. I do tend to lose my place a little bit. But human beings, we do have that need for control. You know, when a wind blows, if I'm outside reading and changes the page that I was reading, I don't just carry on reading from where it's blown to, I move the page back. And that is that need for autonomy and control we have over our environment that is innate. It is different from many other animals to have that kind of mastery over our environment and over our circumstances. So straight away, within any care environment, we need to make sure that that is offered as an opportunity, whether it be the inclusion of being able to decide how a room is decorated and laid out, especially if that is my own room, for instance, having some inclusion or decision-making in the routines. Now, the reason this is, no matter which end of the spectrum we're working from when it comes to care, if we're promoting inclusion within children, and obviously we have to manage based on their cognitive and emotional abilities, you know, it needs to be to some degree their developmental milestones should be appropriate for them to be able to cope with this. Don't want to push them too hard, but we also want them to build a level of autonomy and control. So kind of building and nurturing that kind of ability to choose and feel included in the choices, as far as even what would you like for pudding? When you're going shopping, what should we get? Now, this is stuff that we take for granted, but so much of the behavioral management stuff I teach and so much of the kind of the principles that I teach are just common sense parenting that we'd apply to a younger child, just apply to everybody. That if for any reason those milestones have been missed for some reason, then maybe this individual needs those low-level choices and autonomy and go back to the kind of real basics, even though they are later in their chronological age. Maybe if we're supporting somebody with, intellectual disabilities, they may need more support and be doing those basic inclusive skills at a lower level for longer. Or maybe they can't make the bigger decisions, or they can't feel included in some of the big stuff in their life, but they definitely should be included in the decisions and the setting and the routines as far as earlier in their life. And this is where, you know, the nature of the culture of care has changed over the years anyway, in the fact that the person who is being cared for should always be at the center of their care. They should have kind of autonomy and control over their preferences, their likes, their dislikes, you know. But I do encounter some people still find that difficult and don't always know where the appropriate boundaries are. Let me give you an example of this. I've encountered it a few times. I always think in behavioral support plans, for instance, it's never a bad idea to have, let's say, I like going in a car with this member of staff, and I like watching a movie with this member of staff, and I like playing board games with this member of staff. Now, sometimes I've encountered environments that feel that, well, we can't allow the individuals to dictate who they do stuff with. And it's not always from a place of because they shouldn't be allowed. It's a case of because of logistics. Those staff can't always be there. And I kind of try and get over to them that it's really important to, as far as inclusivity, we're trying to create an equality of fairness. And therefore, I am able to choose personally. I am able to decide that I like going to the cinema with certain friends, and I like going in the car with other people or being driven by somebody else. I like playing board games with that particular person, but I may not like playing board games with that particular person. And that's not me controlling, that's me having a preference. And therefore that inclusion for me to be able to dictate that, you know, I take for granted because I just do it, because I have autonomy and control. For somebody who doesn't necessarily have that same ability to decide for themselves who they want to do what with, there is an element of support or, support or management from the care environment. They should be allowing that to occur to an appropriate degree anyway. Now, what I'm not allowed to do is I like spending time with you, and therefore you have to do everything with me. You have to go to the cinema with me, play board games with me, do this with me, do that with me, do the other with me. because that would not be fair on any relationship in my life. That's not a healthy relationship, and therefore it wouldn't be appropriate for me to do, and I wouldn't consider it be right. So therefore, that would be the extreme of going, yeah, we're not expecting that from, we need to have those boundaries in place for somebody in care. But having preferences is not the same thing as dictation and dictating. Okay. And there is a line between the two. And that's what we're talking about as far as that inclusion. When we go to the dementia side, it's aspects of inclusion there as well, making sure we are providing some level of input from those who live in the setting of, who decides what meals there are, who decides what activities there are. Because if it's purely the staff, if it's purely the organization, maybe we're not being as inclusive as we possibly should. Because only if I've decided on a particular activity I'd like to do, well, I'm probably more likely to be engaged in it or involved in it. If part of the inclusion process is you've looked at the meals that I always used to enjoy when I was young, and maybe I've got a slight different cultural background, and therefore including me within that access to food that I once would have enjoyed, or music I once would have enjoyed as well, is really important to ensure that I'm feeling included and part of the community as well. So it is so diversity, maybe going into diversity there a little bit, diversity, inclusion are kind of coming together that a little bit. Being aware of people's cultural backgrounds, their religious beliefs, their cultural heritage, their ethnicity, their preferences, likes and dislikes, all coming in together to make that person-centered care approach. Now, we do have to be careful on that, though, don't we? That we are being very mindful of our own biases and our own preferences and prejudices. I don't like it when people talk through a movie. I want to just sit and watch it and enjoy it. And therefore, if you're talking, I can only focus on one thing at a time. And therefore, I find it irritating. I just want to stop the movie and go, when you finish talking, I'll carry on watching it. But for the person who does like talking through the movie, maybe that's how they prefer to watch movies, to narrate on it, to talk about it. They feel more involved in the movie by talking about it. Now, that may mean that we shouldn't watch movies together, and that's okay. But who's to say that I'm right and they're wrong? So I have to be kind of mindful that if somebody's talking through a movie, depending on the circumstances, I can't say, well, you shouldn't do that. Because again, I've spoken on other podcasts about should and shouldn't, must and must nots are dangerous games to fall into. But I think the whole process that we're talking about as far as inclusion, as well as inclusion of is being listened to, making sure we are listening to those that we are supporting, looking after, whether that be in a classroom, whether it be within a care setting, that we are taking their opinions into consideration. Looking at it from an educational point of view, I think one of the podcasts that some of you may listen to with Rachel, who was the teacher who ran the school from a restorative practice point of view, so didn't use punishments, rewards, or praise. I don't know if it's included in the episode, but a wonderful story of where she spoke to the kids about a certain initiative that they had, a reward, a reinforcer, which was Hero of the Week. And they spoke to the children about, how do you feel about that? Does that motivate you? How does that kind of promote? And it was interesting as far as they sort of went, yeah, not fussed. It's just a turn-taking exercise. They could see through it. They saw that there was no real value. It didn't motivate them. It didn't drive them. So it's like, yeah, it's all right, but it didn't add anything to their lives. And the teachers themselves wouldn't recognize that. They thought they were doing something good. It was the students who communicated that. And that actually reminds me of another story as well, which was it was a nursery environment where, rather than, they did a bit of a survey between the adults and the children. And I think they did it through monitoring. I don't know whether the children were old enough to actually verbally do it. But basically, some independent individuals kind of watched the movement of the children around the nursery. And then the teachers or the nursery leaders were also asked about their perception of the environment and how it should be laid out. And I remember that the teaching staff, the nursery workers, the staff at this particular setting, felt that there were certain places that were not important, or it'd be better to have something there that the kids could engage with or do something with. But actually, it was the empty spaces that the children really liked to some degree. They liked having all the stuff in there, but the empty spaces felt important more to the children. They actually spent quite a lot of time in the empty spaces because that's where they had opportunity to transition. They had opportunity to interact with others. They had space to play games that weren't necessarily involving toys or activities or objects, where they could kind of be on the floor and have a little bit of space to act out and to be. And I thought that was really interesting, again, that if they'd just gone from the adult's perspective and they hadn't then taken the movement and the behaviors of the children and hadn't included those within the process, they actually would have made their environment less positive as a result of that. So again, it's that it isn't necessarily having to include individuals as far as the communication from words. It could be including their communication through their behavior, through their actions on a day-to-day basis. We also want to make sure we're being inclusive as far as the way we present information. So if I do have individuals in a setting where maybe English isn't their first language, or maybe they don't, they're non-speaking, then are we providing information in a way that, again, is inclusive? So we do this within training. So one of the things when we're delivering training sessions is we often speak to the organization that we're providing for and make the request, have you got any learners who might have any additional needs or specialist needs as far as the education is concerned? So we have then provided handouts on different colored paper. We have sent over copies of our materials in PDF, so they could potentially use their computer to view it, so they can make the text bigger or smaller, or they can put a filter on it so they can see it clearly themselves. So that level of inclusivity allows them to engage in the training effectively. I have had translators when I've been delivering to individuals with hearing impairment, for instance, so that they could have that same equality of access to the information that I was passing over. Giving you a few reasons of kind of why it's so important, but so how do we do it? How do we promote that inclusivity? Well, the first thing is about education. Knowledge is power. So I know that's a cliche, but it's so important that we do find out about different cultures, different needs, different preferences, how individuals see the world. And yeah, we can start from some generalizations as far as typically, but then we really need to dig down into the individual themselves and see what their kind of preferences and likes and experiences and perspectives are. We also need to speak up. If we put our inclusivity head on and we're looking around an environment, how much are the individuals we're supporting being included in decision-making, in choices, in routines, in boundaries, in the rules? If we're not at all, we need to be kind of looking at that and going, well, how can this be improved? Raising and speaking up as the advocates for the individuals to kind of go, how can we improve this? Can we make this better for them? Because if we recognize the importance of that inclusivity is, significant for individuals' mental well-being and mental health, and giving individuals control, help them to feel safer within their environment while we're developing the trust, while we're giving them that sense of autonomy and control to keep themselves safe. So we need to speak up and advocate on behalf of these individuals as well. But we also need to be open about our everyday interactions, recognize that we are going to make mistakes. We aren't necessarily always going to be able to see things from everybody else's points of view. But it can be instinctive to get defensive sometimes, to kind of feel like, well, how was I supposed to know? And, although I don't think ignorance is necessarily, it's not a defense in a court of law. I think naivety is sometimes important, but ignorance is always should be looking to kind of improve. It's okay to get away with it on the first time, but then we should know about it and explore it on the second, third, and fourth time. I think that's always the thing with ignorance. If I don't know what I don't know until somebody lets me know I don't know it, and then the ignorance is no longer an excuse at that point. Most of us tend to really value diversity. Like we all like to wear the clothes we wear. We all like to have our hairstyle the way we do. We all like to, whether it be body art or the music we listen to or the car we drive, like to choose a color of the car you drive. There's so much that we like our individual preferences, and we would hate it if anybody else took those preferences away from us. So we genuinely tend to really value diversity until we come across something that just is against what our fundamental values might be or what our fixed ideas. And it just crosses that line and causes some cognitive dissonance and some discomfort or just uncertainty. And I think it's really important that we embrace that feeling of uncertainty with curiosity rather than rejection and defensiveness. And that's where anybody who knows me knows I go on about growth mindset all the time. That you are not the finished article. You are not perfect the way you are. You are not good enough. That doesn't mean that you can never be, but thinking you are just good enough means there's no room for growth and improvement. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to mess up. If you think, well, I'm perfect, I'm good enough the way I am, then I make a mistake. Then how can I learn from that, grow from that, accept that, and be better tomorrow than I was today? So I think it's but that growth mindset is I'm not good enough today, but that doesn't mean I'm not good enough yet. I'm not good enough in this situation yet. And that yet is definitely a massively important word. So being open to the unique qualities of others, learning from those, recognizing when we've made a mistake and looking to improve. So I think it's important to draw us to a close on today's episode. And hopefully if you did find anything, interesting, raise any questions for you, please leave a comment. Please, like, share. If I've posted this in social media anywhere on LinkedIn, please make sure that you do comment and give me some feedback, or give me an example of where you've come across either an incredible kind of action of inclusion or where you've seen inclusion maybe being missed and it could have been improved. So remember that inclusion is an ongoing journey, not a destination. We're always learning. We're always improving. We can't know everything about everything. So this is a journey we're on. But hopefully you found today's episode useful, and I will see you next time.